When you think about the deadliest dictators in history, Hitler probably tops your list. And look, that's understandable. The Holocaust killed 6 million Jews, and the Nazi regime murdered 17 million people total. That's horrifying. Stalin comes in around 20 million deaths. Mao's policies led to somewhere between 40 and 80 million deaths, making him the highest body count in human history. But here's the thing, we're measuring deadliness wrong. The seasonal flu kills about 500,000 people every year. Infecting a billion of us, Ebola has killed around 15,000 people total, but has a 50% mortality rate. Which one is deadlier? If you're thinking Ebola, you're right. It's not about raw numbers, it's about the proportion. I'm way more scared of king cobras than stairs, even though stairs kill exponentially more people. So if we measure deadliness by the percentage of a population killed, Hitler murdered 17 million out of Germany's 79 million people. That's 21% of his country. Stalin killed 20 million out of the Soviet Union's 162 million citizens, 12%. Mao's 40 to 80 million deaths in a nation of approximately 650 to 700 million people works out to roughly 6 to 12%. But there's one dictator who looked at these numbers and said, "Hold my beer." In just 4 years, he killed up to 36% of his entire country's population. He turned his nation into a graveyard so efficiently that Cambodia became a country where the living envied the dead. Towns became ghost villages, schools became prisons, families were erased from existence. His name was Pol Pot, and this is the story of how a failed engineering student who couldn't even understand Karl Marx became the deadliest dictator in modern history. Pol Pot was born in 1925 as Salothsar into a relatively wealthy Cambodian family. While most Cambodians were peasant farmers, his family had connections to the royal palace. One of his cousins was a royal concubine. This got him into elite schools where he learned French, the language of Cambodia's colonial rulers. In 1949, his family's wealth and connections earned him a scholarship to study radio engineering in Paris. This is where his life took a turn. In post-World War II France, communism was having a moment. The Soviet Union was expanding across Eastern Europe, and Mao had just won the Chinese Civil War. Young intellectuals everywhere thought they were witnessing the future of humanity. Pol Pot joined the Marxist circle, or as he called it in French, Cercle Marxiste, for all you baguette enthusiasts out there. He attended meetings, joined the French Communist Party, and spent way more time doing revolutionary cosplay than actually studying. But here's the embarrassing part. Pol Pot tried reading Karl Marx and later admitted he didn't really understand it. So if he didn't understand the actual theory, where did his ideas come from? He spark-noted communism by reading Stalin and Mao instead, the two guys who'd already killed tens of millions of people trying to implement these ideas. Yeah, you can already imagine how this was going to end. His study plan was basically, let me learn communism from history's two worst communists. It's like learning to cook by studying the Donner Party. After failing his first-year exams, barely passing on his second attempt, and failing again, Pol Pot gave up and returned to Cambodia in 1953. Without his degree, Cambodia had just gained independence from France and was immediately thrown into civil war. Pol Pot joined a communist guerrilla group that would become known as the Khmer Rouge, Red Khmer in French. For years, he remained completely in the shadows. He used pseudonyms like Brother Number 1, Elder Brother, 87, and Grand Uncle. Most members of his own party had never seen his face. He was building himself into a myth, an invisible leader who would eventually emerge as Cambodia's savior. By 1970, Cambodia's civil war had reached a turning point. A military coup led by General Lon Nol established a right-wing government backed by the United States in Phnom Penh. Meanwhile, communist North Vietnam was already at war with America in the Vietnam War. North Vietnam supported the Khmer Rouge, which meant Cambodia became another front in the Cold War. And that meant Cambodia became a target for American B-52 bombers. The US claimed it was only targeting communist military positions. In reality, the bombing campaigns killed mostly civilians. Between 1965 and 1973, the United States conducted a massive secret bombing campaign in Cambodia, dropping approximately 540,000 tons of explosives on the country. To put that in perspective, that's more tonnage than the US dropped on Japan during all of World War II, including both atomic bombs. Every village destroyed by American bombs became a recruiting center for the Khmer Rouge. Peasants who'd lost family members to the bombings joined the communists seeking revenge. The Khmer Rouge's forces grew dramatically. Some estimates suggest their numbers increased fourfold in just a couple of years. Turns out, indiscriminately bombing a country creates more revolutionaries, not fewer. Who knew? I'm sure the United States learned this lesson and never repeated this strategy ever again in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. Oh wait. By April 1975, the Khmer Rouge had conquered nearly all of Cambodia. Only Phnom Penh remained. On April 17, 1975, the capital fell. Pol Pot's forces marched into the city as liberators. The nightmare was about to begin. The first thing you need to understand about Pol Pot is that he wanted to erase history itself. He declared 1975 to be year zero, the beginning of a new civilization. Everything before this moment would be destroyed and forgotten. His vision was simple but insane. Cambodia would become a purely agrarian, self-sufficient, classless utopia. No cities, no money, no private property, no religion, no families, no schools, no books, no individual identity, just millions of people working in rice fields to feed the revolution. Within hours of taking Phnom Penh, the Khmer Rouge began forcing the entire city to evacuate. 2 million people, including children, pregnant women, elderly, and hospital patients still hooked up to IVs, were ordered to march into the countryside immediately. The Khmer Rouge claimed the Americans were about to bomb the city. This was a lie. They wanted to empty the cities because cities represented capitalism, corruption, and Western influence. Thousands died on these forced marches. People who couldn't keep pace were shot. Hospital patients died in the streets. Still attached to their IV poles, families were separated and would never see each other again. Anyone from the city was labeled a new person and marked as an enemy of the state. If you were a doctor, teacher, engineer, or wore glasses, you were targeted. If you spoke a foreign language or had soft hands from working indoors, you were suspicious. If you were an ethnic minority, Vietnamese, Chinese, Cham Muslim, you were marked for death. A famous Khmer Rouge slogan for the new people was, "To keep you is no benefit, to destroy you is no loss." Even the old people, peasants who'd lived in the countryside before the revolution, weren't safe. The state seized all land, families were broken apart. Husbands, wives, and children lived in separate dormitories. People couldn't cook their own meals. Food was communalized. They couldn't even use the word I anymore. Only we. Local party officials, terrified for their own lives, began falsely reporting higher and higher crop yields to satisfy the leadership in Phnom Penh. The central government would then confiscate even more rice based on these fake numbers, leaving villages with nothing. People starved while warehouses full of grain rotted. The conditions were so catastrophic that life expectancy in Cambodia plummeted. While exact figures are debated, the country transformed from a developing nation into a death camp where survival past middle age became rare. But starvation and overwork weren't enough for Pol Pot. He needed to purify Cambodia by eliminating anyone who might threaten the revolution. This led to the creation of what became known as the Killing Fields, execution sites scattered across Cambodia where approximately 1.5 million people were murdered. That number, 1.5 million, doesn't include people who died from starvation, disease, or overwork. That's just the murdered. The most infamous site was S21, or Security Prison 21. Before the revolution, it had been Tuol Sleng High School, a place where teenagers studied math and literature. The Khmer Rouge converted it into a torture facility. Classrooms became interrogation rooms. Iron bars were welded over windows. Electrified barbed wire was strung around the compound. S21 could hold up to 1,000 prisoners at a time. Each prisoner was photographed upon arrival. The Khmer Rouge were meticulous about documentation, just like the Nazis. Many of these photographs survived. The Cambodian government has published them online. Looking through them is devastating. You see teachers, monks, former government officials, mothers holding children, all of them knowing what was coming. The Khmer Rouge had one strict policy. Prisoners could only be killed after they confessed to crimes against the party. It didn't matter if they were innocent. Everyone had to confess. And to force confessions, interrogators used systematic torture. Prisoners were beaten with electrical wire, given electric shocks, burned, suffocated with plastic bags, or hung upside down for hours. Some had their fingernails ripped out with pliers. Others were cut repeatedly with knives, forced to eat human feces, or had their heads held underwater until they nearly drowned. Between torture sessions, prisoners were shackled to the floor with leg irons. They slept without mats or blankets. They couldn't speak or move without permission from guards. They were fed 4 spoonfuls of rice porridge twice a day, just enough to keep them alive for more torture. They were hosed down like animals every 4 days and suffered from ringworm, rashes, lice, and untreated diseases. Eventually, everyone confessed. They had to. Confession was the only way to end the torture. Prisoners made up elaborate stories about being recruited by the CIA, KGB, or Vietnamese intelligence to betray the revolution. They were forced to name friends, family members, and colleagues who would then be arrested and tortured themselves. This created an endless chain of accusations, arrests, torture, and death. After confessing, prisoners were taken to the school's playing field, now a killing field, where they were executed. To save bullets, guards beat them to death with bamboo sticks, iron bars, or farming tools. The bodies were dumped into mass graves. The Khmer Rouge even had a rule about murdering children. At sites like Cho Yung Ek, guards would smash infants and small children against a tree that became known as the killing tree, then throw them into the pits alongside their executed parents. The reasoning was chillingly simple: to prevent them from growing up and seeking revenge. Out of approximately 14,000 to 20,000 people imprisoned at S-21, fewer than a dozen survived. By 1977, Pol Pot had a problem. He'd killed millions of enemies, but Cambodia was getting worse, not better. Crop yields were declining, people were starving, infrastructure was collapsing. The promised utopia was a nightmare. His solution? The revolution was being sabotaged from within by traitors inside the Khmer Rouge itself. Thousands of Khmer Rouge cadres, the people who'd spent years executing others, were now arrested, tortured, and executed by their own comrades. Many of the senior leaders who'd helped Pol Pot seize power were systematically purged. By 1979, the majority of the original leadership was dead, killed by their own party. Pol Pot's slogan during these purges was "Purify the party, purify the army, purify the cadres." He became especially paranoid about Vietnam. The Khmer Rouge started conducting raids across the Vietnamese border, massacring entire villages. This turned out to be a catastrophic mistake. In December 1978, Vietnam invaded Cambodia with 150,000 troops. The Cambodian army, decimated by years of purges and starvation, collapsed in weeks. By January 7, 1979, Vietnamese forces captured Phnom Penh. Pol Pot and the remaining Khmer Rouge leadership fled into the jungle. The nightmare was over, but the horror of what they'd find was just beginning. When Vietnamese soldiers entered Cambodia, they found a country that had been murdered. Phnom Penh was a ghost city. Buildings were gutted, streets were empty except for stray dogs and rats. The National Bank had been demolished. The Central Hospital was abandoned, still full of rusted medical equipment. In the countryside, villages were graveyards, fields were full of human bones. Survivors were skeletal, traumatized, many unable to speak. Temples had been destroyed. Schools had been burned. Every book that could be found had been thrown into bonfires. S-21 was discovered intact. Documentation and all the photographs, confession documents, and torture devices were all still there, providing irrefutable evidence of what had happened. The killing fields were everywhere, mass graves containing hundreds, sometimes thousands of bodies. After heavy rains, bones and teeth still surface from the ground today, more than 40 years later, out of Cambodia's population of approximately 7 to 8 million in 1975. Between 1.5 and 2.5 million were dead by 1979. That's a mortality rate of 21 to 36%, the highest of any dictator in modern history. Here's what makes this even more infuriating. Pol Pot was never punished for what he did. After fleeing into the jungle, he continued leading the Khmer Rouge in a guerrilla war against the Vietnamese-backed government for another decade, and he wasn't alone. China supported him because they hated Vietnam. The United States supported him because Vietnam was allied with the Soviet Union. A coalition government that included the Khmer Rouge retained Cambodia's seat at the United Nations until the early 1990s. Read that again. A coalition that included the organization responsible for killing up to a third of Cambodia's population was internationally recognized for more than a decade after being overthrown. Pol Pot was never captured by international authorities. He was never tried for genocide. He never faced justice for the 1.5 to 2.5 million people killed under his rule. In 1997, some of his own commanders finally turned against him. They put him under house arrest in the jungle. In April 1998, they allowed a journalist to interview him. When asked if he had any regrets, Pol Pot said his conscience was clear. On April 15, 1998, Pol Pot died in his sleep at age 73, reportedly from heart failure. He died peacefully, never showing remorse, never admitting wrongdoing. He lived long enough to see the internet become mainstream. He He lived long enough for South Park to premiere and for Harry Potter to become a global phenomenon, while the bones of his victims continued surfacing from mass graves every time it rained. He spent his final years in comfortable exile, surrounded by family. Saloth Tsar, Pol Pot, was everything he later tried to exterminate. He was wealthy when most Cambodians were poor. He was educated when most were illiterate. He was urban when most were rural. He wore glasses, he spoke French, he studied in Paris. He enjoyed Western literature and radio technology, yet he built an ideology that targeted anyone with even one of these characteristics for death. Brother Number 1 promised to triple Cambodia's population and create a workers' paradise. Instead, he killed up to a third of his country and dragged the survivors backward to year zero. The man who couldn't understand Karl Marx created one of history's purest experiments in radical communism. The student who failed his engineering exams engineered a genocide. The revolutionary who wanted to erase the past ended up creating a legacy that Cambodia will never be able to forget. Today, S21 is a genocide museum called Tuol Sleng. The photographs of prisoners line the walls, thousands of faces staring out at visitors. The torture devices remain on display. The iron beds where prisoners were shackled are still bolted to the classroom floors. School groups visit to learn what happens when someone tries to erase history and start over from scratch. The killing fields are memorials. At Choong Ek, the most famous site, a Buddhist stupa contains more than 5,000 human skulls recovered from mass graves, just a fraction of the total dead at that single location, and it's just one of approximately 20,000 mass grave sites scattered across Cambodia. The bones still emerge from the ground after heavy rain. More than 45 years later, Cambodia is still literally digging up the evidence of what Pol Pot did. Farmers still find human remains in their fields. Construction projects still uncover mass graves. Cambodia today is a young country because Pol Pot killed so many of the old. The average age is 26. There are very few elderly people because so few survived. An entire generation's knowledge of farming, of crafts, of music, of history was lost. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you. If you found this valuable or learned something new, hit that like button. It genuinely helps me create more content like this. And here's a question for you. Why do you think Pol Pot was never brought to justice? Was it Cold War politics, international indifference, or something else? Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more history that actually matters. And remember, the deadliest dictator in modern history was the one with the highest kill rate, and his name was Pol Pot.